Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is all around sign interpretation and when you should be thinking about adding this to your online events, and hopefully a bit of detail about how as well. Today's event is part of a broader series around diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, and how in the tech industry we can start to think a little bit more progressively about some things we can do. My name is James Woolard. I use the pronouns he and him, and I'm responsible for the Reactor program across Europe. I'm also the Pride and Events lead for Microsoft's LGBTQI+ chapter in the UK. So we're going to be talking about sign language. Before we get into it, I would like to remind you of our code of conduct. We'll just be hopefully popping that in the comment section right now. The key takeaway for that is to be respectful of others' opinions. You have the opportunity to drop comments and questions in, which we'll do our best to answer as we get through to it. So we want to very much position this as a safe space where people feel to speak openly. I apply that to myself as well. I'll be interviewing a couple of folk today and don't want to be scared of saying the wrong thing, but confident that we're operating in a safe space. We will be recording today's session and actually posting it on Learn TV a bit later for our colleagues around the world. So hi to people watching it live, but also hello if you are watching the recording. Both sessions will have the opportunity of a live chat and Q&A, regardless of the time that you're joining. Okay, closed captions are also available for today. We will be talking about those in a little bit more detail as we get into it, but should you require them, they should be available. Right, so today I'm joined by two guests who are going to help us look into this. The first is Maya de Wit, and Maya is a sign language interpreter consultant. Hey, Maya, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Do you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself and a little bit about your expertise?
Sure, well, thank you for having me. So my pronouns are she and her. I'm a sign language interpreter consultant. I have been a sign language interpreter for many, many years, since 1993. I'm interpreting in different settings. And now that the world is taken over by the coronavirus and the pandemic, we have been challenged of working in different ways. So a lot more online interpretation. So that comes with new challenges, but also many new opportunities, which is great.
Awesome. We will hear a bit more about that shortly. I'd also like to invite Henk to join us as well. So Henk is a cloud advocate at Microsoft focused on AI. Hey, Henk.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Cool. Do you want to give us a bit more of an overview of what your role is?
Yes. So my name is Henk Boelman and I am a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And in my daily life, I'm focusing on AI. And especially in this time where all the events moved online, I'm also focusing on how to deliver my content of AI online. And that is how I got into this space, by adding sign language to our online conferences and meetups.
Cool. Okay. So maybe as a good starting point, Maya, could you give us a bit of a overview as when we're talking about sign interpretation, what do we mean? And I think people will obviously be able to see it live as it's happening.
Yes.
Can you give a bit of a kind of like an introduction, like a 101?
Sure. So I think one of the misconceptions is that it's kind of like with any language. If you speak a language or you sign language, you can interpret between those languages. Well, that's a very common misconception. So what you actually need is to make sure that you have a trained interpreter in place to actually interpret between two languages. Now, I'm trained firstly actually as an American Sign Language interpreter. That's how I got into it. Just happened to end up in the United States and had the opportunity to acquire American Sign Language and got so excited and actually never left and added more sign languages after that. But what is important is that when you work with sign language interpretation is that you actually make sure that you recruit qualified and registered interpreters. So who is actually able to provide you the interpretation, but also the interpretation between the languages that you actually need. So if you are looking for a sign language interpreter, you got to make sure that that interpreter can actually interpret the sign language that is needed for your event. So I think that's an important aspect. Don't know if you want me to get more into it or...
Well, I'm curious about languages, actually. So coming into my assumption would be everyone speaking English, therefore sign interpretation for any English-speaking event would be the same. But that's not the case.
No, it's not. Actually, it's a very good question, because I think the most frequent request that I get is when people think, oh, English is the language of the event. Can you please provide English Sign Language?
Yeah.
Well, there is no such thing as English Sign Language. It doesn't exist. So you have countries where the spoken language might be English. So, for example, the UK or the United States or Australia, and also Malta. And they're different countries, but they all have their own national sign languages, which is very different from each other. So if you, for example, are hosting an event in the UK and you need an interpreter for, deaf people who are attending the event, you would need a British Sign Language interpreter who can interpret between BSL, British Sign Language, and English. And we've had the situation that at an event, the organizers thought, oh, okay, so we just put an ASL, an American Sign Language interpreter, in place. It doesn't work. They don't, they're completely different languages.
I did that at the first event.
That's right. You told me.
How did that work out for you, Henk?
Yeah, we organized our first Azure Thursday meetup in the Netherlands. And I got an American Sign Language interpreter in it. And of course, I didn't know until afterwards. I think even Maya told me.
So given, I guess, the global nature of online events, like if we're doing anything online, then they can be viewed by anyone around the world. Is there a best practice? Like, how do we do that? And also, what language are we using today, given we're kind of projecting worldwide?
Very good question. So there is what we're providing today is International Sign. And International Sign is a combination of different sign languages, which are most iconic and most frequently used in an international arena. Now, the interesting thing, International Sign is not considered an official language. And it's something that's very true and beautiful about deaf communities around the world. So there's no such thing in spoken language. So when deaf people meet in any international given context, they can find a way to communicate with each other, because sign language, the beauty about sign language is that it has these features that you can make a lot of things visual that might be not so easy understood in the spoken language, but for signers, it is more easy to communicate. So, for example, if I meet someone myself from, let's say, Russia, I don't speak Russian, they might not speak English. If we communicate with each other through a form of sign, then we can make an understanding. We create understanding in that communication, which it's great. You will not have, a scientific presentation in International Sign if you've never met each other. But in daily communication, it's a great tool to use. And for this, International Sign is also provided at any international events where there's an international audience. And typically, now that we're online, International Sign is like a good practice to offer to those around the world when you cannot, or there's no dedicated national sign language for this event. So, for example, Henk asked me before, well, we're organizing a Dutch event. For that case, I would always recommend to use Dutch Sign Language interpretation. So I would not say offer International Sign, because it makes no sense. The audience who will be watching or attending will understand far less if you offer it in International Sign than in a National Sign Language, because National Sign Languages are fully fledged languages, have all the features. You can say anything in a national sign language. And this is much differently in international sign. International sign is also something that can evolve over time, or even in an event. So if we host an event on a specific topic, we create together with the attendees, certain concepts and signs that are understandable for the audience. So we get feedback from them, visual feedback. They say, yeah, that's a good sign, or we prefer to use that sign for this concept. We have done the same now for the events where Henk has put us into place. We check with other deaf people who are watching us, providing interpretation. We ask, do you think this works? Do you have another sign for this concept? Because there are not many international sign interpreters that interpret what Henk is presenting online. So it's been an absolute adventure to provide these services.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So particularly, I guess, coming from a tech perspective, Henk, what's your experience been today or to date with adding this to your events, given the nature of the content that you're delivering?
Yeah, so what I learned is that it is very important to debate with the sign language interpreters what you're going to present. Yeah. So what we mostly do is we try to collect all the presentations or recordings and try to send it over. So the discussion can take place also a little bit before. So Maya and the team will go through the presentations. We have a meeting before where we talk about what it actually is, because we use a lot of specific terms in AI that are pretty hard, I guess, to interpret.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it is all about the part before the communication. And that is one thing I've learned, because I thought you just put it on like closed captions, and that is absolutely not the case if you're doing international sign language.
Yeah. So closed captions, that's an interesting one, actually. Let's hear a bit more about that, because my assumption was, offering closed captions was the right thing to do if we could, switching them on. And we obviously have that capability in lots of our platforms now where we can do it. And often people can choose the language in which they view the captions. What's your view on that, Maya, as a kind of solution? How does that work for the deaf community?
Yeah, so I think what is essential with whatever service you offer, you always have to ask those who are using the service what they prefer.
Yeah.
So, no one is the same as we are all different. Everyone has their preference as to what they prefer to access an event. So I always try to encourage to do both if possible. So if you have closed captions are great, but it's written text. You don't have the intonation there. And it's all you need to read, which is a very different way of getting to the information than through a language. It would be the same as if we would turn off now the sound and we would read our conversation. It's a different conversation you're going to have, a different way of accessing information. So it's very crucial that if you want to actually get the information, you get it in a language, and a written language is great, but it doesn't give you everything that you need to get that information. And I think there's a very important difference between, I think if possible, always provide live captions. So not automatic captions. I know AI is, evolving quickly. But from all the feedback that I have gotten from, deaf people around the world, they're not happy with the automatic captions because there are too many mistakes there. And even live captions, you have to get really qualified live captioners who can do the job well. It's the same as with interpreters or any other service that you buy. You got to make sure that you get the right ones. But I've worked with great captioners who just do a beautiful job and who can really provide, the captions live. And also then we provide sign language interpretation. So then people who can access both, they can actually read, because some words you want in written text, and you have the full language, the information in a language provided to you as well.
Interesting. Okay.
Can I tag on to what Henk was saying before still? Yeah, because I think Henk really pulled out an extremely important point, is namely preparation. Not only with international sign, with any language interpretation, preparation is key. It's the same as, anyone would walk into a meeting. If you don't know what's going to be discussed, it's much harder to catch up on the conversation. What are we talking about? Oh, if I would have known we would be talking about this, I would have thought about it. Same with interpreting. If I know already, the text or the topic, the items that might come up, it actually takes less of my brain processing when I'm actually interpreting. I can focus on my output instead of what are they saying, or I'm trying to understand what they're saying. So then it makes the interpretation much more clear if I can actually prepare, think about it, and then produce it.
Yeah.
So that's key. So Henk did pulled out the right feature there.
And I mean, I would say a build on that, which is maybe off topic for today, is thinking about people who are visually impaired as well, because there's obviously, if you're presenting materials and things like that, there's a lot you can do there to improve the accessibility for both groups. So if you are investing the time at the beginning of your event from a planning perspective, then there's things you can do to make it more accessible overall.
Yeah, I think audio description is a great tool for that. You see more and more offered that audio description. But even, for people who are blind or people who are deaf, it really helps if the presenter or other disabilities as well, if you describe what the viewers actually see on screen. Yeah. So we can include it in our interpretation. Because you have to imagine that if you're watching an interpreter, you're watching the interpreter, but at the same time, you need to see what's happening. So, for example, the sessions that Henk organized where they show all the coding, it makes no sense for us to repeat what they're reading off the screen. Like, I'm coding this and this and this and this now. We would really do this. I'm waiting for my colleagues to do the same. We would point to the screen and say, okay, you can look now, because it makes no sense. If you look at me, it's more clear if you just look how the codes happen on the screen than if I sign every single code that's being said now. Yeah. So there's, you always have to think about what's best visually for the viewer to understand the content.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask a little bit more about your kind of background in this? So how did you end up being a sign interpreter consultant?
Sure.
To this point.
Yeah, I did a completely different bachelor right after high school, and that actually brought me to 1 year in the United States, where I went and did an internship at the School for the Blind. Okay. And they had a small group of deafblind children in the school. Actually, they asked who would like to learn American Sign Language, because the children have so few people to communicate with. And then you would think, but they can't see. How is American Sign Language going to help? But you would use American Sign Language in a tactile form. So children hold your hand while you're signing. So they follow the signs while you're producing them. And which is great. So I started to learn American Sign Language, and I just went for it. Every day and night, and I just loved it. So that was my first sign language. I went back to the Netherlands. And then, in the Netherlands at that time, I wanted to get a training as a sign language interpreter, but the interpreter training program was folding. So decided to go back to the States, got my interpreter training there. And so firstly got trained as an American Sign Language interpreter, and then later a Dutch Sign Language interpreter. I did my MA and added international sign. And now I'm working actually on my PhD. So just keep learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Henk, can I ask why you're so kind of passionate about this topic in particular, and what kind of drove you to start thinking about it when we shifted online?
Absolutely. So it all started mostly when I was small. I grew up in a family where my brother and my mother are blind. So I always had to deal with assisting them, helping them out, and seeing how much was being like kind of shielded for them because it was not accessible. But I really started realizing it when I was in the Netherlands. We go from lower school to higher school. So when I moved to the brugklas in Dutch, I ended up in a wheelchair and I couldn't like walk for a long time, for a year. And I went back to school, me being very happy that I finally could go back to school. And there was no elevator in the school. So,
Right.
and half of the lessons took place at the first and second floor. So they were just not accessible for me. And then like the school thought it was like a good idea to pick me out of the wheelchair, climb up the stairs with me, and just drop me there. And then my mother got pissed. Like, what? With her experience, of course, of being excluded for so many things. And she was like pissed. And I was like, at that time, like, okay, yeah, whatever, I can do my lessons, so that's fine. So after like 10 years, I kind of realized why that was. And yeah, so it is almost the same with like kind of the thing we now have with automated captions. So you get like 80% of the experience. And that is what I want to provide with our online events, that everyone has the same experience from that event and everyone can benefit. And it is not like, oh yeah, we have that, so that is good enough. Or what in our first conversation with Maya, we had that same conversation. Like I was like, I have money for like 4 sessions and not like the other 12. And Maya was like, yeah, but you want to offer the same experience to both, and not like you decide what that group can view.
Yeah.
So, and that goes multiple ways. It also goes for websites that are inaccessible for blind people. And I always realize they're like, okay, you're promoting this cool event, but my brother can't do that. Or even when you have to fill like university applications, you have to come to me to do that. And that is like, yeah, that strokes me. And I think I'm in a position to make that better and actually help making it equal for everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think there's obviously been a huge shift online over the past 12 months, which I think there's been pros and cons to that. I'm curious, how do you think we're in a better place because of that when it comes to accessibility, or has it widened the gap in certain areas? And either of you can comment on that.
Yeah, for me, I think we had to reinvent a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if I go to went to a venue with my in-person meetups, I always ask if there is an elevator. And if they didn't have an elevator, we wouldn't do our meetup there.
Yeah.
But I, for instance, never thought of adding sign language to my local meetups. And that is the good thing from online, what I realized I can do.
Yeah. Interesting. What's your view on that, Maya? Have you seen a shift?
Yeah, I think it absolutely has created many opportunities. I think more events are now made accessible through sign language interpretation, which I think is great. I just think that we need to make sure that we shouldn't run ahead. Like, we should always keep checking in with those who use the services. So, if you want to offer the services, is great, but you always need to say, is this what you want? Is this what you need? Is this correctly displayed? So one of the things which would be really great, Henk, is what you did is, like, we evolved over time. When we first did the interpretation online, all the different platforms that Henk has tried out to make it better, to make it easier. Because one of the things that is crucial for us, it sounds maybe silly, but the audio. If the audio is not good and we get distracted and we're sitting in our home studios and have bad audio, we cannot produce a good quality interpretation. So audio is key. And not every platform has good audio, or there needs to be a combination made as to where you interpret in and what actually goes out to the world. So these are many things to think about before you put sign language interpretation on the screen. So it's not just like, oh, we have someone who can sign, the person is qualified. Okay, we'll just pop that person on the window, right? I think, Henk, you should explain all the innovative features you have come up with. I mean, through our conversations and through the research and expertise that, I have collected, you actually made the translation into the tech side. So I think you did some great innovations there.
Thank you for that first. So one of the things we have done is actually experimenting with the position where we put the sign language interpreters. I think we moved from a small box on the right of the screen to a big box on the left of the screen, and then put a white border around. Yeah. So I think the actual state you see now. So that is one thing. I think the first time we started out with an 8 or 12-hour event, we had 4 sign language interpreters, and they had to switch every 15 minutes. Because I also think that is something people don't realize, that as I understood it, it is to deliver a good quality interpretation. You should have like 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes and switch.
And why is that? Why do they need to switch?
I think it's cognitively incredibly demanding. So you need to, and it's even more so demanding when you're remote. So you're not on site. So you need to use a lot more of your senses to actually get the information in. So I need to look at a camera. I need to look at a screen. I need to listen to the audio. When someone points at something, I quickly need to check. I also have an extra video channel with my team. I'm actually having that right now as well, just to check if my interpreting team is doing okay. And so we have all these visuals going on at the same time. And then you also have to actually understand what is being said in order to make the interpretation, because it's from language to language, right? So you can't just put signs to a word. You actually need to understand what is being said in order to interpret it. Yeah. So 15 minutes, and especially online, is absolute max.
Yeah.
And then, so we swap every 15 minutes, and then max really 2 hours for 2 interpreters. If you go over 2 hours, I would always say get more interpreters. You can't produce anything more that has the clarity that it needs in order to be broadcasted.
I think we'd say that generally any online event longer than 2 hours is probably
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly the right point, James, because I think many people think, oh, it's because of the interpreter, but no one can concentrate for that long. The same in real events, right? They say, oh, the interpreters need a break, so we now all need to break, but really everyone needs a break.
Yeah. Well, I mean, amongst our team, there's been a lot of discussion around online fatigue recently. And I think, everyone's gone into this new world of online events, behaving as we did with in person. And I think now people are learning the differences there are cognitively on the impact of, interacting in these different ways with people, whether it's, via video. There's research around, having like 4 people on a screen versus 20 has a very different impact on the brain. So I think it's all stuff that we need to be continuously learning and kind of trying to understand what the best experience is for everyone.
Yeah, I like that. You should share that research on the number of people on the screen. We could use that.
Yeah.
Because that's one of our arguments too, is if there's too much visual input also for the viewer, the deaf viewer, it doesn't get across. So for example, the size of where the interpreter, the box where the interpreter is displayed, that size also matters. Yeah. So you see different best practices around the world, but really research from the sign language interpreting world and actually with eye tracking studies, they discovered that the setup that is now being done by Henk is the best one if you use it as an inset. So you need to have it across the screen that size. You need to have it to make it even understandable. And the interesting thing with the frame, there's a big difference if there's a frame or not, because your eyes are constantly framing things. So it actually helps the understanding to have that framed.
Yeah.
So there are many things that we don't think about, but are actually there. So that's great.
That's exactly what that piece was saying. Is I think there's an issue when there's a frame and everyone has a different background, your brain is trying to process, what's going on around people as well as what they're saying. And without a shameless Microsoft plug, we have a mode in Microsoft Teams called Together Mode, and that just literally limits it so that it's just the view of the person, and all you can see is the person, and you can't see their background and stuff, which is supposed to be a lot easier to kind of like engage with virtually. So it's fascinating. It's a fascinating area.
Related to backgrounds, I think what you see now on screen, my colleagues, they have now a blue background, and we change depending on what the client wants. But this chroma blue is actually preferred by those who also have vision loss. So if they're people who are deaf and blind, they often signers they use sign language, but they still have some vision. They prefer the blue because it makes the nice contrast. So you can see also that with dark clothing, and if you have a light skin, you see the contrast much better also with the blue behind you. So it's all about all these different aspects to keep in mind when you organize sign language interpretation services.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess thinking in practical terms, if you're going to be running an event online, I guess, or in person one day, hopefully, what are kind of some of the like practical things you should be thinking about going into that? So what are maybe like 3 lessons anyone kind of watching today could take out of this and then start to apply them immediately?
Sure. Henk, you want to start? Because Henk wrote a great article.
Yeah, we can actually read that article. It's below us.
You can share that.
You can read more. So we have gone through like a few steps, and we have already gone through like a few of those of the points. The preparation point we touched on. So that is all key. If you don't have good preparation, your event will likely not be very well interpreted. So to all the speakers, send your presentation in advance, and it doesn't. You can change later on things, because the most emails I get back is, "Oh, it's not finished. I might change some things." It doesn't matter. It matters that Maya, for instance, can see what it is all about. Pick out the terms, like try to find a sign for Azure Synapse. There has to be a discussion about what that sign is going to be if we're doing international sign. And also, Maya probably wants to understand what Azure Synapse is, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So that is the first tip. Send your presentation in advance and include your speaker notes. And Maya will throw them all away afterwards. So she will not share them or leave them anywhere else. Then it is also important, and something I still have to learn, is how to get your event at the right viewing party, at the right viewers. Because in the beginning, we were adding sign language, but nobody knew we were doing it. So then you actually need to reach the group where you are for who it is intended. And one of the platforms that is out there is comps.tech, and there you can register your event and tick your accessibility boxes. So people who are looking for tech events can actually find that your tech event is offering that. And we talked about a little bit about running the event. Everything is key, is having a good microphone, or yeah, that is just key. Make sure there is a good microphone, and especially for the speakers. But then, as an event organizer, there are also some things you can do. Something I didn't realize is if you don't put the speaker on the screen, if there is a debate between two people and one of them is not on the screen, it is very hard to interpret it because there is some random voice appearing suddenly in the stream. So as a producer of the stream, if someone else is joining, just put that person on the screen, put the camera on the screen. That makes it a lot easier, because otherwise, if I quote Maya correctly, she has to sign that actually someone else is speaking now, and while that one is speaking,
exactly,
already
indicate where the sound is coming from or who that is. And if you have multiple speakers and I don't see that person either, it's also difficult. Okay, so this voice belongs to this person who was just, so it just helps, I think, even for anyone else, just to see who is speaking. It helps in understanding.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd build on that, Maya, in terms of, like, I guess, coming from a provider perspective? Is there anything that you see like clients frequently doing wrong, or kind of like, where people could improve, I guess?
No, I think what is crucial, and I think Henk already mentioned it briefly, is that you have a testing session beforehand.
Okay. Yeah. And
a testing session with the tech, but also with the moderator, so they understand how we actually work. We've, one of the difficulties is that because we are so on screen, is that we've had experience that people would start talking to us as an interpreter. Right. And then we have to interpret what they're saying to us, but we cannot respond because our role is there to interpret.
Okay.
And you get a very awkward situation, and it's also not appreciated by the deaf audience because it's about the interpreter providing interpretation and not having a conversation with the interpreter. So
that's an interesting takeout. Then, if you're a non-deaf participant at an event, the thing that's really key is to make sure you don't then start engaging with an interpreter.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
one thing we did was,
Henk, go ahead. Sorry.
One thing we did was we split up technically the two things. Like, we are now in a StreamYard session, but we don't see the interpreters.
Yeah.
As speakers, and that solved also the temptation, I think, to interact.
Yeah.
Yeah, but coming back also to the testing session, I think with the testing session, then you create also understanding with the tech, like the background, but also the moderator, how to do things, and for us to check the audio. But also, there are so many different platforms out there now that we are becoming experts on how to use platforms and sign language interpretation, more so often than those who are providing sign language interpretation for the first time. So I think it's important to ask sign language interpreters also, is this the platform that can actually be used for sign language interpretation? Because not all platforms are, user-friendly in that sense.
Yeah.
So, like you said, James, before, is like the participants could be all over the screen. You have like 20 participants, and then the interpreter becomes this small. Yeah. It makes no sense. You tick the accessibility box by providing it, but it's not understandable.
Yeah.
So these are things to keep in mind. It's like great to provide the service, but check in with those who are using the service, what they actually need and what size it should be then on the screen. I think that's one of the most common mistakes that providers or organizers make.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And do you see, is there a role for, private organizations or corporates or enterprises to take a bit of a leadership position here? Because it's interesting if we look at, what's happening around the world and the necessity for everyone to access important information from different sources. It seems to me that there's a real, difference in how this is handled in different situations, and there's quite a big gap between, you know, best practice and then zero practice at all.
Yeah,
What's your view on that, Maya?
definitely.
Yeah.
Go for it. I think you have the resources, you have the means. So it would be a fantastic opportunity to actually, you know, push this forward. And the tools are out there, the tech is out there. You just need to put a little bit more of extra effort into it to learn how to do it. But it's essential. I think if we want you know, people to contribute to the development overall, we need to make everything accessible. So that's my big lobby in all that I do is, you know, make things accessible, because we all have a right to access to information.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great opportunity now. And especially there are more events that were first maybe unlikely to be able to be made accessible. So you can also see, for example, nonprofits who are going out of their way now to provide accessibility, because now everything is remote. It is easier for them to provide it. So there are absolutely benefits to, you know, what we've learned as to accessibility opportunities during this pandemic as well. So we do want to go back on site though, because we love and do much better job if we're actually in the setting than to work remotely.
Yeah. I've even seen it in social media as well, actually. Over the past 12 months, there seems to have been a bit of a conscious effort from, you know, influencers and so on to add the static captions, I guess. But I mean, that is obviously I would have thought a step in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just you know, I mean, it's great to have a different topic made accessible, except for coronavirus, right? The whole thing that happens around it. But you need, as a citizen, you need access to the information that everyone else gets firsthand, like the press conferences, the healthcare information. You need that in your native language, which is, for many deaf signers, that's their national sign language. So what you see also around the globe is that great best practices of providing live sign language interpreters at press conferences. That's how it should be done. Unfortunately, not in all countries, but this has been a big lobby from the whole international deaf community to make sure that we actually have an interpreter on site to have real-time information and not read it later in text.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this briefly earlier, but it sounds like in the US in particular, things are a lot more accessible now with the new administration coming in. There's been a big shift.
Definitely. It's really good to see. Yeah. Great developments. Unfortunately, you're in the UK, right, James?
I am.
Yeah. So your Prime
away.
Minister has not shown best practice.
Yeah.
The British deaf community has lobbied hard with the hashtag, where is the interpreter? Yeah. And they have gone out of their way and are being ignored, which is very sad. Very sad that, you know, that people cannot access live information in their own language. Yeah. So we've seen very good practices here in the Netherlands. Great. We had the press conferences all live interpreted. And we need to make sure that this stays, right? So it's not just because we now have a pandemic that we put an interpreter in place, but that actually continues afterwards as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'm conscious of time. Are there any kind of final points, either Henk or Maya, that you'd like to land with people? Any kind of successes or tips?
Yeah, I have one thing. We talked about adding sign language, and I want to emphasize that it is not just for big corporates or big events to do. We do it with our small meetup in the Netherlands. Every Thursday, we always add sign language for the 2 hours, and of course, there is a cost of adding sign language, but we were always having sponsors that sponsor a location, a physical location, and providing food for up to 30 to 40 people. And that was never a problem. But with that going away, those companies can still sponsor your meetup by making it accessible for everyone. And you feature your sponsor. That is what we do. So saying you don't have the money is not a real excuse of not doing it. I think there are a lot of ways to actually find that money. And what I noticed is that my sponsors were like, whoa, that is so nice that I can actually do that thing, making this event accessible.
Yeah, and potentially increasing the reach of it as well. So it's a win-win.
Exactly. So now we hope that when we go back, that it is still. But I will do my best for that.
People can bring their own sandwiches.
Yeah, and I think related to that, what Henk is saying, I always say to organizers, don't, when you make your budget for your event, don't make the last row of your budget the sign language interpretation services or the closed captions. Make that your first, because you reach such a bigger audience. It's part of your event budget. And if you keep that in mind, it doesn't become an add-on cost, but it's just a cost that you have to have in order to organize this event. I think that is the danger of always these discussions like, oh, yeah, we still need sign language interpretation. Oh, sorry, we don't have any more money.
Yeah.
But if you just say, yeah, we're organizing an event and these are the things that we need, just like you need the studio, just like you need, to have speakers fly in when we can do that again, you also need to make it accessible.
Cool. Thank you so much to both of you. That's a super interesting discussion. I think lots of lessons there for people. Great. I think folk, if they want to get in contact with either of you, I guess we can drop kind of handles and so on in the chat so people can see how to do that. But yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank you for Henk for everything that he has done.
You're welcome. And yeah, thank you for joining and helping to write the blog. So if you want to read more, I would definitely visit this link. There are more tips also tips how to do it a little bit more technical. And I think my Twitter is always open to answer questions about helping to set this up. And Maya's contact details are also in the blog. So if you need some sign interpretation, then you know where to find Maya.
Thanks, Henk.
Cool. Thank you very much. We shall leave it there for today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.